Hello and welcome to Talking About My Generation. I'm Herb Ricardo with Alicia Vassar and Rich Grego. And today we're going to talk about consumerism. And I put something together over here, which I'm going to read out, and so that everyone kind of gets a really good idea of where we're going with this. And then, we'll certainly open up the floor. As we explore the philosophical idea of consumerism, a lifestyle centered on continual acquisitions of goods and services as a measure of success and happiness, we must ask what this pursuit truly costs us. In much of modern life, progress and achievement have become synonymous with material gain. We work longer hours, we chase higher incomes, and measure worth by possessions rather than purpose. And of course, I think we all know this. This is the world in by which we live in. We want, whether we're going on our social media, if we're interacting with our friends and family, we're talking about the purchases that we make. We're buying a new house, we're buying a car, we're buying clothes, we're buying watches and glasses, and all kinds of things. And of course, some of these are our needs and some of them are wants, right? But when we think about consumerism, and especially for today, I think we're going to talk about the excesses of it. And by the pursuit of consumerism, by the pursuit of buying for the sake of purchasing and having, are we taking so much time away from our human interaction with our loved ones? And so that's consumerism. And have we gone too far? And is this taking up too much of our time away from our family and friends? And so I'm going to give that to Alicia and say, what do you think?
So I find that interesting that you say it's like taking away from time with family and friends, because one of the first things I thought when you brought up consumerism is the like trends that I've seen in consumerism. Uh, One of them was the Dubai chocolate, which everyone is starting to see everywhere at this point. And then there was also these little keychains called Labubus. And one of the things that when I was like going through, because I like wrote down some notes thinking about it and stuff, I think to a point we buy these things to connect with other people, because for both the Dubai chocolate and well, specifically the Labubus, it's like I don't want to say a cult. That's too much, but there's definitely a social thing around it. There's, we all like this item, this thing. So for to me, it feels like to an extent, uh, consumerism. We kind of fall into that trap to try to connect with people, because I know for people they might see like, oh, my friend has this thing, they're talking about the Labubus and stuff, so if I get one we have something to talk about. And like there's this very much social aspect to it, where I could see it being a trap where you'd fall into buying this thing to connect around with other people. And I wonder if you guys have noticed that as well, Rich.
Yeah, sure. It's a really good point you make. I think because you look at man, you think about all the topics, so many of them that we've talked about: happiness, self-identity, and self-esteem, and ambition, career, things like that. Think about how much in our daily lives, consumer culture and our consumer wants and needs play into all, have a huge influence on all those things. Um, so I do think that's probably the case in terms of our relationships with other people, and everything else. And as Herb wrote, we were sending some notes prior to this discussion. It's not just sort of an economic issue or anything anymore, sort of an abstract social issue. It's kind of existential, right? It's something that's vital. It's sort of fundamental to people's lives and experience. So I agree with you about that. And yeah, I'm sure Herb would agree too. Why raise the top? Why raise the issue?
So, Alicia, you were talking about, these keychains, fads. And so what happens with a fad is that it's something, right, that one is interested in, and then a group gets interested in it, and then and you're right, it brings you together. Older people will remember back in the 70s there was this thing called a pet rock, which you could
Yeah.
actually buy. It was just a rock, and people were selling these, right? And it was almost like your pet. And then people would talk about, do you have a pet rock? Do you have what's the name of your pet rock and everything else? And and I think throughout decades and everything else, we might purchase something that becomes a fad, and they don't have to be small; they can be large. You can have fads where people want to buy pools for their homes, right? And do you have a pool? Yes, I have a pool. Or what size is your pool, and everything else, right? And then we find out, how much time are we actually spending in the pool, right? So we spent all this money to put a hole in the ground, put water in it, and talk about it and how great it is. And so, consumerism, as you mentioned, no doubt brings us together. We're purchasing, and there is this competitiveness of purchasing, and economically, this has clearly helped our world. We manufacture goods. And we purchase those goods, and we put the goods in our homes. Look at all these books, right? Who needs all these books? And all the, got little trinkets there and everything else. But it's a reflection of our personality. So there's nothing wrong with purchasing, right? There's nothing wrong with the idea of going out there and buying something for what we enjoy and we like. What we're talking about is, have we gone too far? And if you think about working and trying to achieve, are we trying to earn the highest level of income that we can solely, or maybe not even solely, but because we want to have things and purchase things? So we spend a lot of time at work trying to get better positions that pay more money, right? And by having that more money, we can purchase more things. And if we've got family and friends, we can buy more things for them. But but in reality, when we start reflecting on, my goodness, I'm spending so much time at work. I'd like to be spending more time with my family and my friends, right? Of course, then the other argument to that is, well, if I don't have enough money, then I can't spend time with my friends because I need to be able to live. I have to pay rent. I have to buy food and everything else. And so we're in a time where it's hard to moderate. We're trying to figure out what's that level of moderation where we can earn enough that we can have the things that maybe, well, everything that we need, and then certainly certain things that we want, but then also balance that with spending time with family and friends. And I think, again, we're in a time where uh, we really equate the more that we have, the bigger our homes, the nicer our cars, the better clothes that we buy, or the more expensive clothes that we buy, we equate that with a higher quality of life, where the quality of life really exists, as the three of us really believe, in the
Mhm.
relationships and the interactions. And so if we're spending so much time away, how much time do we do this? And I would think Gen Zs, my students, want this work-life balance. I would imagine that consumerism is kind of moving away this whole level of purchasing more, purchasing, and spending more time and recognizing, no, I want to spend more time with family and friends. What do you think?
I agree completely. I think it kind of makes you think of the fact that it's kind of a trap. It's this idea that if I buy this, and I've heard this sentiment before, if I buy this, then A, B, or C, I will be happier. I will be able to do this thing. Um, and I think it's very easy to fall into that trap. I was thinking about the fact that, like, for Gen Z in particular, social media has accelerated that. I do see more consciousness in consumerism in my generation, but like I said, Labubus, that's a Gen Z thing. That's I don't think I'd imagine anyone else but Gen Z, maybe some millennials hopping onto it. But it's still obviously something that's out there and that we fall trapped to. I think of fast fashion is definitely something that my generation has a, I don't know if I'd say a problem with, but a love-hate relationship with.
Hmm.
Um,
What does
because
that
it's
mean, that term?
Yeah,
fast
sure.
fashion.
Mhm.
Fast fashion is fashion that is, so you know how there's trends in clothing?
Mhm.
Well, fast fashion is accelerated that. Instead of the trends being longer and like I would think back in like the 2000s when my aunts, they're millennials, for them it might have been a little bit more time between fads and trends.
Mm.
For us, it's literally every week. A store like Shein, H&M, they do fast fashion. Zara, they can release new clothes on a weekly
Wow.
basis,
Mm.
and because they're new, they're fashionable, or they're deemed the end thing. It's very easy for us to just buy tons of it. And
Yeah.
when you're talking about a place like Shein, there, or in general, clothing has become cheaper, but the process of making that clothing has become more and more exploitative to get it as cheap as it has. Not to mention buying all of these things is not really great for the environment. We don't use them,
Yeah.
but I think it does show that there's this trap. Like you can keep saying, okay, my closet is complete is once I have this piece,
Mm.
but then you're back there next week, and then you're back there next week.
Mm.
Um, and I do see that there's again, like the purchasing of things, it feels like it does reflect on your identity, or at least culturally, it feels like it's often how we shape our identity. And I was interested in Rich, if you would have like, do you notice that kind of, I don't know if it's specific to my generation. I think it's just
Mm.
how consumerism is working at this point.
Yeah, that's another great question and great observations. Before I was curious to know when you said the fast fashion. Herb might want to comment on this too because it's sort of an economic thing. But when you're saying, Alicia, that fast fashion necessitates it being more exploitative, is that a word? I guess it is.
Yeah.
Is it being more exploitative? Do you mean on the people who are producing these
Yes,
things in other
yes.
countries?
They have to make them cheaper and cheaper.
Hmm.
These clothing pieces, like if you're talking about someplace like Shein, they have mass factories that are making these items, and people are only making like cents on the individual
Hmm.
item that is being made.
Yeah.
Um, it's yeah, that's not to mention the resources that are required to make it, the water, all of those that are being taken. Usually they're not from Western countries. They're usually from the global South.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. And I guess to your question too, um, you know, I bet Herb would agree with me. We're from basically the same generation. I think I'm one step. I think they say that the cutoff for baby boomers is 1964. If you were born then, I think Herb was probably born in 65.
64.
And I was 64. I was born in 63. So we're both boomers, I guess. We're still boomers. But I think historically, consumerism, you really would locate it. Again, we were talking about thinkers like Eric Fromm, the famous social psychologist who talked about the marketing orientation and how consumerism has literally shaped people's identities because people now look at themselves as commodities and then they identify with the commodities that they own, and they label other people according to the commodities they own, right? And prestige, status symbols, and all that stuff. I hardly know. I'm not like this, but I hardly have a middle-aged colleague that does not have a sports car now that they're making money, right? It's like all of a sudden the dreams of their youth blossom and everything. But I think that kind of consumer identity and consumer ethic really is a product, if you want to locate it historically, of, the post-industrial sort of an era and post-commercialist era. When life became less agricultural and less, maybe if you want to call it that, spiritual, religious, and more focused on secular economic life and financial status and things like that. But I also don't think it's new. I think that probably because I know our generation and before, in the 1920s, right? They talked about, people started identifying with the model, what kind of model, what kind of Ford car you were driving and all that kind of stuff. And, they started mass manufacturing cars so there were middle class cars versus elite cars and things like that. And I know, everybody used to talk about commercialism and consumerism, in the 1950s. It's probably just as much as they do now. I think maybe the big difference, as you say, is that for people who want to buy into the consumer identity, life is a lot busier and probably a lot more of a challenge because you've got to, there's just so much available and the scene changes so rapidly that it's harder to keep up with it. So I don't know what you think, Herb, too, if that's a fair appraisal of the difference in generations regarding that.
Yeah. You're right. And then, of course, the other thing too is we there's a term which a lot of people are probably familiar with, and certainly the women out there, and that is shop therapy, right? So
Mm,
we equate feeling good with buying. We
yeah,
equate um, purchasing. Let's go to the mall. After church on Sunday. We'll get a bite to eat, and then we'll go to the mall and walk around and maybe purchase some things.
not to interrupt, but just a quick
Yeah.
interjection, but from my own personal life. When I want to cheer my wife up when she gets depressed because of the family and stuff, easiest fix for her is take her shopping, and that's what we do. Even if she doesn't buy anything, I can just watch her relax, browsing the stores. And when I want to cheer my niece up, who's now older, she's in her early 30s now, buy her a Labubu, as a matter of fact. So she's got to add to the collection she has. So yeah. Anyway, go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt.
Yeah, and so, but again, so this feeling, so what we've done as a society that we've
Yeah.
equated, feeling good. So when we're with our family or friends, let's say let's go to the mall, and back in the old days there was window shopping, right? When you walk down the high street and looks inside the window, and just that the pleasure of fantasizing about oh, imagine those clothes on me and everything else. Well, and Alicia talking, when you're talking about fast fashion and everything else, and the fact that, you can be buying things today at just micro levels of the cost of what they were many years ago. And so that's exactly it. You can just keep buying and buying and buying. If you're buying a shirt for $5, $8, $10, you
Yeah.
can be buying these things, or it gives you the illusion that everything's cheaper. The problem is we're spending our money. It's a shirt here. It's a cup of coffee here for another $4 or $5. It's whatever it happens to be, and before you know it, the day's gone on, and you just spent $70. And when you start doing that, and that's because you've gone to these different places versus you stay home, you eat your meal or you have whatever, and then you just say, I'll meet my friend out and we'll just have a coffee together. And then you've only spent, $5 or $7 or $8 instead of $70 versus purchasing. And then you go home and a month later you look at the bill or whatever, and you start to see, my gosh, look what I've done. I've just spent so much money on this. And so the question is how do we get away from that good feeling that we have when we purchase and we put on the shirt and it makes us feel good, or we buy the new glasses and we feel good. There's a feeling when we're wearing something that we like, or if we're driving a vehicle that we enjoy, or that we're going to a restaurant, whatever it happens to be. But how do we moderate that so that we're not spending quite that much doing that and spend more time doing this, right? And this is what we truly want. We often talk about this 1 hour of our time together is so valuable to us. We love it. We enjoy our time together, and we all with our family and our friends and everything else. But if you think about how much time do you spend with your family and your friends versus how much time do you spend at work, uh, making money and then out spending it.
Mhm.
So, if we try to balance all that out, and Rich, I try to think about, what would a philosopher of 80 or 90 years past, be saying about are we spending enough time thinking, or are we just spending a lot of time reacting? Are we being very purposeful in in our lives? And of course, a modern philosopher might say, well, the person really feels like they need to be earning that higher salary. So not only will it give them the ability to purchase more, but also maybe um, be able to retire earlier,
Mhm.
right? If you earn
Yeah.
enough money in your younger years and you save it, you put it off to the side, obviously not doing too much consumerism and buying too much. Then when you get older, but Gen Zs are going, why should we wait till we're in our 60s and 70s and 80s to spend our time, with our family and friends? Why not do it
Yeah.
now? And
Yeah.
I think that's that balance that, and it'd be interesting to know what, how philosophers would
Yeah.
try to
Yeah.
see these two
Yeah.
dichotomies.
Yeah, yeah, and then that's a good question. And can come to think of it, both of you guys are saying, I wonder if you're sort of suggesting that maybe for whatever reason, I don't know what the social psychological causes of it are, but maybe Gen Z has reached a point where they're in a sense wiser than prior generations were when they were younger. By saying that, why should we sacrifice quality of life in those vital respects now, um, to just, for the promise, for this promissory note of having it later, once we've sacrificed all our time with our friends and family and quality of life by, so that we can win this, materialist rat race. I don't know. Do you feel that that's the case? Alicia, or do you think you guys are just as
So
dumb as every other generation has been?
so I think it's a product of the fact that we're very hyper aware of the fact that this planet is dying. The
Mm,
idea of a future where we will get access to these things. Also, we've seen how our parents, our grandparents have been told that this future is there if they work hard,
mm,
if they do this and that,
yeah,
and they don't have access
yeah,
to
it
it.
ain't
People
there.
have less access to a
Yeah.
pension. Like when I found out about the pension that my great grandfather had, and that supported him for the rest of his life. He was very well off from his pension. It was a really great thing. And my great grandmother was able to get the pension once he passed. Um, so that was a very like seeing how that worked out. I could see why someone would invest all that time, and I believe he worked in the courts in Dade County for I'm not sure how many years, obviously enough to get a pension.
Mm,
That's not something my grandparents had access to. That's not something that my parents had access to, and I don't think I will have access to a pension. So this idea of being
mm,
told to wait for the future
mm,
is it's kind of it sounds insane and in a lot of aspects. Um, but besides that, I think there's also going back to the kind of it, the buying of items, the consumerism and stuff. It reminds me of our happiness, contentment, and pleasure episode because yes, there is an actual like tangible
dopamine
affect.
fix.
Yeah, yeah, you get the
Yeah.
emotional. It does help. There is therapy to it. The question is how long does that last?
Mm,
I think it's definitely more of that pleasure than it is that full fulfillment that you get from happiness
yeah.
or contentment. uh or maybe you can reach contentment through purchasing items, but I don't think you can get that real happiness.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And just to return, that's a good segue to return to the question you asked me, Herb. If you look at the history of philosophy and other, related, areas of human concern, right, or fields of knowledge and stuff. I think, there's a very consistent from the ancient philosophers like Plato and Aristotle through the more modern ones like Kierkegaard, I'm thinking Nietzsche. So many of them have had this sort of three-tier hierarchy of human motivation. And even modern ones, I don't know, modern philosophers aren't even saying anything interesting anymore. But I mean, if you look at some of the, say, social psychologists like Abe Maslow and people like that, and Rogers, they too have had this sort of hierarchical tiered notion of human motivations, where you have at the top level, and again, depending on who it is, something like in sort of intellectual or sort of spiritual motivation to understand life and the world and our place in it, and the meaning of what our purpose in life is supposed to be based on that. And that's sort of the motivation you attain when you've attained the highest level of human development.
Pinnacle.
And then beneath that comes sort of and this is really the universal. I happen to be writing right now a book. I'm in the process of researching and writing a book that has a lot to do with this hierarchy, this philosophers in the sort of 1900s. It's called the Scottish Enlightenment school of philosophers, called this faculty psychology, because they said we had these different faculties, the highest one being the spiritual one, next highest one being sort of our ambition-driven faculty, where we want accomplishments in life, right? And then the lowest level, really, of human development, and you can almost see people progressing through these stages in their lives, right? Because the child, of course, is at this lowest level, and what they have is what is often called an appetitive appetite, appetitive faculty, which is, what can I do to fill my life and literally my body with personal pleasures, whether it's food, right? Little babies are always putting stuff in their mouths, right? Freud called it the oral stage of human development, right? So it's just this quick fix kind of pleasure. And so, interestingly, I think that philosophers and psychologists and social scientists throughout the ages sort of recognized the importance and the fundamental importance of satisfying certain appetitive needs you have, but all have also recognized that is, in terms of human development, maybe a relatively low level of human satisfaction and human development, and that needs to be, if you're going to live a full life, supplemented by ambitions, genuine accomplishments in life, right? So I've attained the career I wanted to attain. I've attained the awards. I've written the book I always wanted to write, whatever it is. And then beyond that, the attainment of a sense of, why the hell did I even do all this? Why did I even bother getting out of the bed in the morning? And why do I continue to my whole life? So I just think maybe the good thing to do is to keep the consumerist aspect of our personalities and our motivation in its place, instead of rejecting it, which some people do, right? Buddhist monks want to get rid of that entirely in their lives because they think it impedes their attainment of the higher abilities. So anyway, I'm talking too much. But I think that's a good thing to keep in mind as far as philosophy goes.
Well, and Rich, I like the idea of this and a balance of the three, right?
Yeah.
There's a way that you can, because we want to be able to meet each one of those areas. And it reminds me a little bit of Lawrence Kohlberg's moral development, right?
Absolutely.
And so, obviously, you go through, the lowest level.
And I bet it mirrors that hierarchy too, right?
Exactly. Exactly. The consequence, we follow everybody else, and then we go ahead and we do above and beyond, what is the right thing. And I would love to cross-pollinate those those three versus those three right there. There's no doubt. And again, Alisha says it really, really well, in the sense of, why delay Why delay having a good life
Mm,
later on, where later on, is maybe 20% of your life, and you're going to spend 80% of your life not doing. But of course, we live in a world where we must work. We live in a world where we must acquire. We got to be able to, whether or not we purchase a house, or at least we have to rent a place to live, or
yeah,
wherever we are. If we're in the United States, we have to have a car, depending on this, state
yeah,
that we live in, versus being in Europe or in another country where there's
yeah.
public transportation. But the point really associated with all of this is, yes, it's a matter of how do we do that, but then also, and I don't want to go off the rails, but that's what actually makes a lot of our economy work. The more we produce, the more we purchase, until we get to a point where we can figure out a way how to create a system by being able to live without having to manufacture quite as much, purchase quite as much,
Yeah.
and the movement of goods and services, and of course, capital. But
And oh, go
but
ahead.
that's
Yeah.
obviously for another economic.
Yeah, yeah. And before because I wanted to hear Alicia's feedback on that, but just to interject one point quickly, that makes, yeah, I mean, you and I talk about this all the time, and because you're thinking about this all the time in your work, Urban, you're teaching research. Um, is it in the the established order's interest? And I don't want to sound too that sound when I start sounding abstract like that, people start thinking you're a conspiracy theorist or something like that. But I mean by the established order, I mean the economic forces that rule our lives, our government, and our social life. Is it in their interest for us to be happy, to be contented? Is it in their interest for us to attain those higher motivations? Because if people were all like Plato's or Aristotle's ideal person, or the Buddhist monks' version of enlightenment, they would. What the hell would happen to our economy, right? If everybody turned into a Buddhist monk, this whole system we've got going would crash, wouldn't it? We'd have a lot of probably happier people, but is that what they want? Isn't consumerism and our consumer lifestyles, our material lifestyles, driven by discontent and unhappiness? Just a thought. So I don't know what you think, Alicia. That I wanted to hear what you thought.
So I was thinking of the fact of one of the things that I thought of with the consumption is this idea of conscious consumption is I have seen it.
Mm,
I've seen it in the kind of social media sphere where people because I've seen videos there. I don't know if you guys have been promoted if they're specific to gender or age or
mm,
specificity. But it'll be someone doing a morning routine, or maybe they'll be doing something in their kitchen and they have all of these gadgets. And a lot of times, there will be ones from other countries like South Korea
mm,
or China, and you'll see all of these really cool specific gadgets like uh, a, not this one's not like unique or anything, but like a towel warmer, um, or something for washing rice, and then the rice cooker, it's like all attached, all of it's in one. And a lot of people, that's how they end up buying items. They'll see something online and they'll be like, whoa, that's so cool. And they'll end up purchasing it. So I've seen the opposite end of it of people being like, we don't need all of these items. There is
mm,
just a basic way that you can do this, that we've always done this, and you don't need a gadget to do it. So one of the things that I thought when thinking about it is, isn't the social media sphere itself, it kind of promotes that consumption. Part of why someone is even shown to you in the first place is or not most of the time, but to some extent, they're influencers. They're to influence you in buying. If it's not that,
yeah.
the app itself is marketing you items to purchase.
Mm,
Um, to keep you on the apps and things. The reason they want to keep you on social media and why there's algorithms that make you do these things, or not make you these, that subconsciously push you to do these things. Um, they're there to sell. They're for consumption. So it is kind of part of the culture and society around us. But I do think it is interesting to see that people are still trying to find ways of doing conscious consumption. Besides that conscious consumption, I've seen people who do um, they try to reduce the waste amount that they have. Like for it, I've seen people who've managed to fit the amount of waste that they have in a week into a jar, which is insane. I don't think I could possibly ever do that. But there's
Fascinating.
there's
Yeah.
ways that we as people have tried to, I guess, counteract the way that these things work. But I think it is very, I don't know if that'd be like existential. Rich could probably tell me, but like it is surrounded around us. We are the whole entire, like Dr. Ricardo said, the economy is ran through this consumption of goods and stuff. So it does feel a lot like a machine.
That's a good.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it's a great question, and you know what? It reminds me of, and and one of the great things about my classes, I get to talk about this stuff all the time in my classes, and I love to share it with friends, and hopefully it's enjoyable. But we have this phenomenon where, we're drinking more water today than ever before. This started 20 years ago and everything else. And so we go around and we buy bottled water, right? But then, of course, we get conscious, and there you go. And then Alicia, is drinking her water out of one of these containers because guess what? It's better instead of going out and buying all these plastic bottles like Rich just drank water out of, right?
No,
Um,
that was glass. It's
have
glass.
it's what?
It's glass.
Oh, it is. It's a
Yeah,
glass.
yeah. I'm a connoisseur.
And but what happens is of course then the fad, okay, is that everybody has these containers. So guess what happened in China and everywhere else?
Hmm.
They made so many
Yeah.
of these containers. There's almost now way more containers, and now people are collecting those containers.
Yeah.
Again, back to consumerism. You
Yeah.
like one thing, you just can't buy one of it. There just can't be
Mhm.
just enough for one. You have to
Mhm.
keep going and buying more and more and more. I don't want to get onto a political environment over here, but guns. There are people who like, hey, I like guns. And again, collectibles and all that kind of stuff. Hey, listen, I like to collect pens.
Mhm.
So I have more pens than I should have. Okay. So that's a collection. I know very well that Rich's mother-in-law used to collect plates, which
Mhm.
look beautiful all around the house and everything else. Hey, there's nothing wrong with that. And I think, we've been collecting things for centuries, right? Through human the question is are we only collecting one thing or are we collecting multiple things? And we're purchasing at the rate of almost the same level of collection. So
Yeah.
so that's the point. We are collecting so much. And Rich talks about whether or not the establishment, whatever the establishment is the economic model or whatever, do they want us to be unhappy so that as long as we're unhappy, we're out there purchasing stuff by purchasing where there's an exchange of goods, money goes to a company, flourishes. And then back to what you were saying, Alicia, that you get that moment, that short spurt, right, of pleasure for that man. But then over time, come back to what I say. A month later, you get the bill, and you all come crashing down. And a conversation like this there is no way on earth we will be able to solve the consumerism issue. Where we just need to try to figure out for other people maybe watching this and for ourselves is how do we create an environment where we feel that where we are consuming just the right amount so that we don't feel that consumption is taking over what we would prefer to be doing. And that's, I think, where our space is. And that's why when we talk about whether we're talking about happiness, whether we're talking about joy or a standard of living or feeling, all of that is a matter of how to moderate it to the point where we're happy. I'll take it one step further, and that is there are going to be people out there who consumption will continuously make them happy for their life.
Mm.
And so for them, that's where it's going to lie. But I think we find that in general, for a greater population, we're recognizing that we're probably spending a little bit too much time working and purchasing, and not enough time with connectivity.
Quick follow-up question for both of you guys. Again, it's sort of an intergenerational question, right? It speaks right to what you just asked, or the point you just raised, Herb. To what extent do you guys think that perhaps, Gen Zs and younger people now who are, who live on social media, or at least, well aware of it, and are really savvy and are get bombarded and with media images and advertising and all that stuff at a much higher, more intense level than say Herb and my generation did, and certainly generations before that. Do you think maybe they're becoming more savvy than we ever were, and more self-conscious and self-reflective about allowing consumerism to take over their lives, to drive their lives, than perhaps we were? Just because you almost have to be. You kind of have to be more savvy to not go insane, right? With all the directions you're getting drawn in this way. I don't know what you guys think of that.
I
If
think
that's possible or no.
I think it'd be a really good conversation to have with someone who's in marketing, because I
Mm.
think, like, I see a lot of, when I took a couple marketing classes and during my degree, um and obviously online, the internet is its whole entire marketing scheme in itself. um there's a consciousness, there is, of the way that marketing is supposed to work a lot
Yeah.
more clearly. But then there's like it makes me think of one of the ways that companies started marketing is through social media. They would have accounts. So Wendy's would have a Twitter account, KFC would have a Twitter account, and then they will say insane things that are really funny or out of character, and that really pulled. I remember this kind of happening maybe around 2015, 2016, and I've kind of seen it still exists, but I feel like the power of it has lost its level of oomph. Maybe that's because of the way that how fast things move with technology and the internet, and just in that space with marketing and stuff. But for me, I did, at first I fell into it because I mean, it is funny sometimes. I'm trying to think of one. I think Wendy's had beef with, pun intended, probably Burger King or another fast food place. And it's really funny and out of character. And some of the people are who run these media accounts, because there's a human behind it, are genuinely funny people. They're usually other Gen Z. I've actually, now that I'm thinking about it, I've seen a trend where companies will have their marketing person will be a younger person, their social media person. So they will release videos that are nonsensical. They'll have weird cuts. They'll not make sense, but that appeals to my generation.
Mm.
It's out of the norm or something. So I think, to one extent, I guess, to answer your question, yes, we are hyper aware and we pick up on it, but we're still definitely vulnerable to falling into the traps of marketing, because it's ever evolving with technology, and we're also being involved in these places. And when there's other younger people, there's ways that they can connect, they can uh, speak in a specific way, that
Mm.
through all of that noise we actually see the item, and we end up falling into those same traps of consumerism.
Yeah. I think, Rich, to answer that question too, what may actually happen, I think that, this generation too is recognizing, and I think they do like the connectivity. They do like the idea of spending time with others. And travel seems to be more important at the younger age than ever before,
Mm.
because I think that they understand the value of it. Now, that becomes a form of consumerism in itself. So even though you're not necessarily buying more books, maybe you're buying them, you're having an ebook, or listening to a book on tape, right? Listening to an audio book, which is what that is. But again, you're still purchasing. You're still purchasing.
Mm.
So it may not, we might see the pendulum swing to money still going out there to purchase something, but the purchase might be of traveling more, going out, and using it maybe in the social media environment, maybe paying for a service that gives you more social media versus product. I would also have to probably think that Gen Zs are at the start of their careers, so their purchasing power is actually fairly low. The question is, and I
Yeah.
Alicia, alluded to this, and that is talk to a marketer and what are they seeing the trends are.
Mm. Yeah.
Millennials were actually the group that was studied the most out of all generations. That was up until this time, but I still think that and I would imagine that millennials are still being studied. There's no doubt, and
Yeah.
what their purchasing power is. But yeah, it's a really interesting thought, and I think that people should just think about where their effort and energy is going, right? And I think that's what we're really talking about. We're talking about where are you putting your energy? Are you putting all your energy into work? Are you putting all your energy into purchase? Are you putting energy into building relationships and or just cultivating, having and being with the ones that you care about? And slightly on a slight related topic would be back to we want to spend time with others, so now we go on dating apps, right? And that's
Mm.
that's that's a purchase, right? So now you're
Yeah.
putting money into a dating app, uh,
Yeah.
and you're purchasing that time of looking and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
That you know that's a way of consumerism trying to get you into
Mm.
the humanistic,
Yeah.
emotional environment where you want to be. And we know that, and people don't even enjoy being on dating apps. You'll talk to people would rather not. They would rather be in a more social environment.
Excellent point. Talk about the marketing orient or from and the marketing orientation. That's a great and I've heard people, a lot of people our age who've discovered dating apps and things like that who say that it gets addictive because you'll find somebody, you go out on a date, I guess, or whatever, you start talking to them, and then there'll be 10 other people up there. So as soon as this person, something doesn't strike you, maybe that's maybe not quite perfect about this one person, well, you got 20 other people, other prospective purchases on the dating app. At least that's what people have told me, that the dating that way can be that way. I don't know. I have no experience along those lines, but so I have heard.
Yeah.
I think this has definitely made me think about the ways that I have tried to be more conscious in the way, because we don't really think about it. Oftentimes it is just, I like this thing, it makes me feel better, I'm gonna buy this thing.
Mm.
Um, one of the I watch a streamer, and one of the things that he said about, I guess, I don't know if it was technically the younger generation or just the way that the US economy works. But he's like, we live in a treat economy where people like their little treats. They
Mm.
like the little things that we have access to. And that falls right in line with things like Shein and Temu, where you can get very low cost things, or you used to
Mm.
be able to get very low cost things. Um, Relatively quickly and things like that, food and fads and things. It's definitely made me think that I have to kind of build into not my everyday, but definitely into some routines where there's mindfulness in what I'm purchasing. And I do actually see this in clothing, because clothing is my kryptonite.
Mm.
If I could show you guys my closet, it'd be horrifying. I don't want to do that. It's embarrassing. I have too many clothes. I love clothing. I love fashion.
Mm.
But there's also got to be a level of consciousness when I'm buying something. Is this something that's going to sit in my closet? Because there's a lot of items that just sit in my closet and don't get any wear, no utility out of it.
Mm.
So there's a level of consciousness that I have to put into buying clothes, where I have to think, do I necessarily need that? And most of the time it's no. Um, But then there's also what you were talking about with the dating apps and stuff. A lot of the way that we connect with people costs money. And I think Dr. Ricardo kind of brought that up of like, you're going out to church with your family, but afterwards you want to go get something to eat. And then you're all out. You might as well go to the mall and do this. That's not just family, with friends. When I hang out with my friend, it's usually, do you want to go to the mall? Do you want to go? There's somewhere where purchasing is going to be involved, whether it's just getting something to eat or us doing something. One of the things that I've heard younger generations like their Gen Z is about third places or third spaces, basically spaces where you can exist and you don't have to pay. So one of the
Mm.
best third places that I could think of is a library. You can go there, you can read a book, you can, hang out. You're
Yeah.
allowed to be there.
Mm.
There's not a lot of spaces that are like that. But I think trying to find spaces like that, create spaces like that is definitely where I hope the future goes, to kind of get a more, instead of going for that quick dopamine of happiness that you get from that purchase, you're getting those connections. You're able to still, do what we're doing here.
That's very profound. I never heard that expression, third spaces, or if
It's
that's,
very popular. I started
and
hearing
that,
it. Hmm.
yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And maybe the extent to which we have third spaces in our public domain and in our personal lives says a lot about the relative health of a personally or socially or our
Hmm.
society, what we're like. I don't know if you guys would agree with that, but that's a really profound concept.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that might be in the future, maybe we can talk about a third space because I've had students talk about it,
Mm.
but I think for maybe one of our next episodes, we're going to have Alicia show us her closet, and she is going to find a nice outfit for
Yes or
Rich.
no?
She's going to find a nice outfit for Rich, and she's going to really color him up a little bit
Yeah, yeah,
in his dark outfits, which we all love,
absolutely. I need it.
and everything else like this.
Yeah,
Um, super, super. Any parting words, Rich, Alicia?
you guys have said it all.
And hey, this is great. We all have places where we need to be. I know a couple of you have got things where you got to go. I've got a couple of things to do. But again, thank you so much for this great time. Thoroughly, as always, enjoy it. And I hope you all out there have enjoyed it as much as we have too. And if you do, hit that subscribe button, and hopefully we'll push another episode to you from here. But until then, keep it between the lines. Good seeing you all. Have a nice and restful week. Take care.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks for hanging out with us today. We look forward to next week as we cover another cool and fun topic. This podcast was produced by Three Lions Production and sponsored by Consulting and Training. Until next time, keep it between the lines.